I had the privilege of going to Tel Aviv last year and meeting Dr. Meshulam, and I stayed at his niece's apartment. And she told me that in 1964, when he discovered THC, the family thought he was crazy. Because why are you going after this active in hashish, they said. And now he's nominated for a Nobel Prize.
Because remember, your endocannabinoid system regulates everything in your body from conception until death. Everything.
A major issue in the introduction of cannabis into the clinic as a legitimate means of medical treatment is the resistance of the medical community, the discomfort not only of the regulators, but specifically of those people who are responsible for administering the treatment itself. The medical use of cannabis has become legitimate, and yet the doctors themselves are still uncomfortable with that. One of the issues, of course, has to do with the preconceptions concerning the use of cannabis. Okay, so obviously it is stigmatized, and there's a lot of stress placed on those who are expected to administer the cannabis, both in terms of their own comfort. Many of the physicians feel that they are displaced, so to speak, out of their comfort zone when addressed with the matter of cannabis. I can tell you a fact from Israel that nowadays many of the doctors, even those who have patients who describe positive experience with the cannabis in controlling various symptoms, will tell their patients that they acknowledge the benefit of the cannabis, but they will not intervene, they will not make the effort, they will not take the step to go ahead and provide them with a permit. So the physicians have certain preconceptions that is obvious. Generally, they always joke about it, and they have all these ridiculous jokes, you know, maybe you will give some to me, and even in formal courses, so-called educating the doctors about the medical use of cannabis, they'll put up a slide of an old lady, and they'll tell the stupid joke about a grandmother with cancer who got cannabis to treat her symptoms, and all of a sudden all of her grandchildren started to visit her frequently, okay? Suggesting that the benefit is for the children who are coming there and exploiting the presence of cannabis in her home. And the point here, which I am mentioning, is that it is suggested in a derogatory sense, okay? It is viewed as something that does not pay much respect to the patients who are using it, or to the notion of using it for medical purposes.
Usually it's difficult to get a big enough audience of physicians on cannabis talks, because people are still waiting to see what their friends are doing, and they are not sure, and many of my colleagues still believe cannabis is some kind of a voodoo and not a real option.
The people who hear what I say and who are cannabis users, they right away understand that, yeah, this is obvious and simple. And yet when I talk to scientists and doctors, they can't even hear it. It just blows my mind.
Gap in knowledge often serves many of the clinicians as an excuse simply to keep away from that dangerous field of cannabis. So they say, there's no knowledge, we haven't been educated, and so on. It's true. Actually, the way we learn is from example. So when we are we train as physicians. We don't learn. It is not cookbook medicine.
So you learn new things every day. It's like in other fields of medicine.
The interaction between the physician and the patient and his entourage, the family and friends or whoever comes along, is critical, of course. And it's same as in any other field. We simply have to act as clinicians who have a sufficient degree of empathy, of understanding, of collaboration, of understanding that we are actually on the same side with the patient and not struggling for control and trying to determine whether cannabis is under my control or not. Because as it happens nowadays in Israel, in many cases, that is what happens, and there is a lot of tension between the physicians and the doctor. And I can imagine it happens elsewhere as well, because people who are under severe medical stress, suffering from various symptoms, occasionally even with previous experience, using cannabis to alleviate their symptoms, and they come to a doctor and the doctor denies any knowledge of efficacy or any scientific basis for their claims. Obviously that is a situation which will give rise to a lot of tension and aggravation and negative results. If we take into consideration all that complexity, which we cannot foresee whenever we will find a formula which will enable us to predict exactly what's going to happen, then we need another approach as clinicians, or to abandon the whole notion of treating people. But the notion is that instead of using some kind of deduction from a set of rules proposed to us by the medical institutions, guidelines from which we derive what is correct and what is not, we can enter the interaction with the patient as a quest, okay? So we are presented each and every time with a new situation, a new patient, new issues. If we would be using something that can cause irreversible damage, we have to be much more careful. But if we have the confidence that we do have with cannabis itself, and not all kinds of synthetic derivatives, mind you, which are a different story. But cannabis itself we know to be safe, and then we can administer it and observe the response and proceed from there. We have the medical institution with its traditional approach, under the confines and under control to an extent of all kinds of conceptions of the pharmaceutical industry and what is legitimate and what is not. And what they are trying to do is to educate the cannabis, so to speak. They're going to bring it into the limits of what is acceptable to medicine nowadays.
Because they're still trying to think of, what dose should we give? How many times a day? That is just horseshit. You know? You take as much as makes you feel better, and then you try a different strain and you feel better or worse. That's what cures illness. That's what helps people. And we've seen it with hundreds and thousands of people.
When we are working in the clinic, we are not implementing something with foresight, saying, this is what I'm giving you and this is what's going to happen. Okay? Each and every case, actually, as a new experience, and we provide it together with a patient and who tests it on himself, and together each one with his own professional or personal perspective arrive at the conclusion if it is doing better for him or worse. And from there we can work on and improve the situation more. And for a fact, this is an approach which is clinically effective. The problem is to give it the form which will be acceptable to the institutions who are actually putting us in the position as physicians to provide health to the population.
That's a synthetic form of THC. Marinol you can get by prescription, yet the plant is often Schedule 1 in many countries. This is a problem I have with what we call recreational and medical cannabis. What's the difference?
The first time a patient in Israel is provided with cannabis, he goes and receives instruction in the use of cannabis. And this is, of course, the result of the initiative of whom? Of the regulatory authorities? No way. Of the doctors No way. This is a result of the initiative of those so-called untrained people who were there administering the cannabis to the patients, the so-called bud tenders or whatever. Okay? They are usually people who have their own experience with cannabis.
We want to be cells that function in harmony together, which is the basis of life. Unfortunately, humanity has taken a little turn to the wrong side because our societies and our governments and our institutions are driven by cannabinoid deficient people. I call them blips, backward-looking people. Because what they are doing is trying to institutionalize everything, make rules for everything so that we can all follow the rules. And then everything will be perfect. Because they don't understand that is exactly the opposite of the way life works.
The physicians need more autonomy. They need more empowerment from the authorities so that they can actually practice on their own. Otherwise, what happens is that the physicians, in many cases and in many different contexts, not only in the context of cannabis medicine, are not implementing medicine as they would have done if it was up to them alone. And they are simply tools, puppets of a bureaucratic machinery which is dictating their medical decisions.